Buenas and good morning, everyone. Imine 36 na Legislature Guåhan is called to order. Assistant Majority Leader, Senator Shelton, you are recognized.
Sujuus Masi, Madam Speaker, I move to adopt today's legislative session agenda dated June 17, 2022.
A motion was made to adopt today's legislative session agenda dated June 17, 2022. The clerks have passed these out to all members. They're also available on our drive. Are there any objections to the motion? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Assistant Majority Leader Senator Shelton, you are recognized. Oh, I'm sorry. We will now proceed to the prayer. And for the prayer, will Senator Mary Torres kindly lead us in prayer?
Hinani Tata Lehines and Espiritu Santo. Amen. We offer these prayers to all the families who are suffering, who have illness in the families, who have recent losses of family members. And we pray to our patron saint. Jesus ngwenegri Maria bulaha gracia Jesus gagita hagu. Umatuna hawan chitoris ifa malawans amatuna ifa nagumo as Jesus. Santa Maria na Jesus sa zuzuti hamni mani sa pagos and yoron ifanata imami amen. Hinani tata lehina and Espiritu Santo. Amen.
Sujuus Masi, Senator. To express a never-ending and never-forgotten gratitude by the people of Guam, the legislature recognizes recipients of Imaladan Mas Takilu na Sacrificio on a display in the Guam Congress building and during each of its sessions. For the recognition of a recipient of Imaladan Mas Takilu na Sacrificio, Senator Shelton, you are recognized.
Sujuus Masi, Madam Speaker. On behalf of a grateful island and country, we honor Sergeant Mark Frederick Biagini and the family of Sergeant Mark Frederick Biagini for making the ultimate sacrifice in service and defense of our island and country.
Sujuus Masi. For the reciting of the Inifresti, will Senator Duenas kindly lead us?
Ginini mas takilo ginasoku. Imas takilum gi coração. Dani mas figo naninan sa nhau. O faz mais isso para bem o protege e defende. E hinengi, e cultura, e linguagem, e aire, e hanum zanitano tomorrow. Nirin shaku diretsu genan sa Jesus tata. Estu efima e hilo Biblia. Zani benderaho e benderan Guåhan.
Would Senator San Augustine kindly lead us in the singing of the Guam hymn, and Senator Moylan kindly help lead us in the singing of the national anthem?
Vanogi tamoru purita nota kantaya tunanya gitodu ilugan para honra para gloria abiba islas en para honra para gloria abiba islas en para todo y tempo y paz para ita Zangin langit na bendición contra peligro na fan sa fuham Zeus protegis land Guam contra peligro na fan sa fuham Zeus protegis is land Guam.
Thank you, Senators. Madam Clerk, please take the roll call.
Senator Ada. Senator Blas. Senator Brown. Senator Dueñas. Senator Moylan. Vice Speaker Muñoz Barnes. Senator Nelson. Senator Perez. Senator Rangel. Senator San Augustine. Senator Shelton. Senator Titleguy. Senator Terlahi. Speaker Terlahi. Senator Torres. Madam Speaker, there is a quorum.
Madam Clerk. Assistant Majority Leader Senator Shelton, you're recognized.
Madam Speaker, I move to excuse members not present for today's session.
On that motion to excuse members not present, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Assistant Majority Leader, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, I move to waive legislative session agenda items 8 through 13. Excuse me, Madam Speaker. Withdraw that motion. I move to approve the legislative journal dated May 27th, 2022, subject to corrections.
On that motion to approve the legislative journal dated May 27, 2022, are there any objections? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Assistant Majority Leader Senator Shelton, you're recognized.
Madam Speaker, there are communications and petitions, and I move that they be appended to today's session journal.
On that motion to append to today's session journal, communications and petitions, are there any objections? Seeing no objection, motion carries.
Madam Speaker, there are messages from Maga'hågan Guåhan, and I move that they be appended to today's session journal as well.
On that motion to append messages from Maga'hågan Guåhan to today's session journal, are there any objections? Seeing no objection, motion carries.
And Madam Speaker, there are reports of standing committees, and I move that they be appended to today's session journal.
On the motion that reports of standing committees be appended to today's session journal, are there any objections? Seeing no objection, motion carries.
Madam Speaker, at this time, there are no reports of select committees.
Thank you.
Madam Speaker, I move that bills introduced, bill numbers 305-36 COR through 308-36 COR, 309-36 LS, and 310-36 LS, and 311-36 COR through 316-36 COR, and resolutions introduced, resolution numbers 349-36 COR through 365-36 COR, 366-36 LS through 368-36 LS, and 369-36 COR through 384-36 COR be deemed to have been given their first reading.
On that motion that bills introduced and resolutions introduced be deemed to have been given their first reading, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. We're now in motions. Assistant Majority Leader Senator Shelton, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, I move to place bill number 260-36 LS, bill number 261-36 LS, bill number 290-36 LS, bill number 295-36 LS, and bill number 320-36 COR onto the session agenda.
All right, just for, could you just read the list one more time, Senator, please?
That is bill number 260-36 LS, bill number 261-36 LS, bill number 290-36 LS, bill number 295-36 LS, and bill number 320-36 COR.
Madam Speaker, if I may, on a point of information,
Please state your point of information.
could I please have the Assistant Majority Leader read each bill number And what the bill references, please?
Yes,
For the
if-
record?
And just 1 second for the clerk, just. And so, yes, and Assistant Majority Leader, if you could please clarify for Bill 295, that is as amended per the clerk, as amended by the committee.
Yes, Madam Speaker, that's Bill number 295-36LS as amended.
And 261 is as substituted.
And Bill number 261,
Oh, okay, sorry. All right. Okay.
okay, I'll read each bill out.
Thank you. All right.
If you'll allow. Thank you,
And,
Madam Speaker.
Senators, you can, the clerk has provided each of you with a gray folder on your desk with all of the bills that are included in this motion, hard copies. Sijuos Masi. Senator Shelton, please proceed.
Sijuos Masi, Madam Speaker. Bill number 260-36LS, introduced by Teresa M. Terlahi, an act to repeal Public Law 34-44 relative to reducing liquid fuel tax rates by 4 cents per gallon to rates prior to January 1st, 2018. Bill number 261-36LS, introduced by Teresa M. Terlahi, an act to repeal Article 4 and Article 5, both of Chapter 26, Title 11, Guam Code Annotated, relative to eliminating the liquid fuel tax. Bill number 290-36LS, introduced by James C. Moylan, an act to add a new Section 26203K39, Section 26201A, B, C, D, and E, to Chapter 26, Title 11, Guam Code Annotated, relative to a temporary exemption of business privilege taxes on the amount received from the retail sales of liquid fuel, and to mandate a visible business privilege tax on gross receipts of liquid fuel transactions. Bill number 295-36LS, introduced by Joe S. San Augustin, Tina Rose Munya Barnes, Amanda L. Shelton, Jose Pito Terlahi, V. Anthony Atta, Frank Blas Jr., and James C. Moylan, an act to temporarily waive the levy of excise taxes, automotive surcharges, and mass transit automotive surcharges on liquid fuel for 180 calendar days to amend subsection J1 of Section 1, Chapter 5 of Public Law 36-54, relative to the appropriations for the Department of Public Works, and to amend subsection DD1 of Section 1, Chapter 5 of Public Law 36-54, relative to the appropriations for the Guam Regional Transit Authority. And Bill number 320-36COR, introduced by Clinton E. Rigel, an act to add a new Article 9 to Chapter 32 of Title 5 Guam Code Annotated, relative to fuel price control, and to cite this act as the Guåhan Fuel Price Control Act of 2022.
Sijuos Masi. Senator Shelton, on that motion, is there any objection? If there's any objection, please raise your hand. Is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. We're still on motions. Are there any other motions? If not, we are in, Senator Shelton, you're recognized under motions.
Sijuos Masi, Madam Speaker. I move that all congratulatory, commendatory, and condolence resolutions introduced today and for the remainder of the session be considered first read and adopted to allow the Legislative Council to make technical corrections and to add all senators as co-sponsors.
On that motion, are there any objections? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Senator Shelton, you are recognized.
Sijuos Masi, Madam Speaker, I move to waive legislative session agenda items 15 and 16.
On that motion, to waive agenda items 15 and 16, those are legislative concurrence and the consent calendar. Is there any objection to that motion? Seeing no objection, motion carries. We're now on the second reading file. Or
Ma-
Senator Shelton, you have another
Madam
motion?
Speaker, I move that we resolve into the Committee of the Whole for the purposes of discussing the bills to be chaired by our Appropriations Chair, Senator San Augustine.
On the motion to resolve into the Committee of the Whole to be chaired by the Appropriations Chair, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. We are now resolved into Committee of the Whole.
Madam Speaker, if I may, can we just take a moment's recess while we bring everybody in? All the committee. You don't want?
The Committee of the Whole is now called to order. Materials for the Committee of the Whole are in the shared session Google Drive folder, labeled 6.17.22 Committee of the Whole. Proposed amendments must be submitted in writing to the clerk via email 36glsession@gmail.com. Amendments not in writing will be called out of order. Here are the rules of engagement. There will be 3 rounds for discussion. We'll have 2 rounds of questions for the panel, with each senator allotted 5 minutes for questions, not including responses. Time to speak may not be yielded from more than one member to another. A member who yields that member's time on a question yields all of that member's time on that question and may not later speak, even if all of the time yielded was not used. That's pursuant to Section 1.02D3. After completion of the 2 rounds of questions, panelists will be excused. The 3rd round will be for amendments or comments related to the bill. After we complete discussion of the bill, I will allow the sponsor to close, and I will entertain a motion for the recommendation of the Committee of the Whole, followed by a motion to rise from the Committee of the Whole, at which time I will report out the bill as recommended by the Committee of the Whole. We will begin first with Bill number 260-36 LS, introduced by Senator Speaker Therese M. Terlahi, an act to repeal Public Law 34-44 relative to reducing liquid fuel tax rates by 4 cents per gallon to rates prior to January 1st, 2018. Madam Speaker, you're recognized.
Mr. Chair, so this bill, as you read out the title, was intended to restore tax rates to where they were in January 2018 when we had increased liquid fuels taxes. However, I would like to move to pass this bill on file. I believe that Bill 261, the subsequent bill, should account for this as well, if we are able to address that one. So I'm going to move to pass Bill 260-36 LS on file.
There's a motion to pass Bill 261-36 LS to pass on file. Any objections to the motion? If there are any objections, please raise your hand. Seeing no objections, motion carries. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this time, before we proceed any further, allow me to call upon the panel guests and for the Sergeant at Arms to swear them in and for their introduction.
Please raise your right hand. Under penalty of perjury, do you all affirm that any and all information you provide today, whether it be verbally, electronically, and in writing, be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Okay. Mr. Chair, you may proceed under oath. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergeant at Arms. Now for the members of the panel, if we can begin to my left, if you could, far left, if you could turn on your microphone, and we'll go all the way down the row, and each member, please introduce yourself. And Senator
Chair, I just got a simple question. 261, there's a basic bill, and then there's a substitute that we have in our folder. What are we discussing, the substitute or the original bill? And I think that needs to be addressed so that we can address the specific bill we want to ask questions on. I just want us to be very specific, that's all.
Yes.
Only because we have it in our folder, and if not, then so be it.
Understood, Senator San Augustine. I will ask the author of the bill to clarify if she's going to make a motion to substitute. Let me allow the members of the panel to introduce themselves first for the record, and then we'll take care of the issue with the Bill 261. Please, ma'am.
Good morning, Senator and Speaker. My name is Julie St. Nicholas. I'm from GRTA. Today I'm representing my interim executive manager who is off island on medical leave. So I will try my very best to answer questions. However, I may not be able to provide accurate numbers. However, I will provide after fact.
Good morning, Senators. My name is Lourdes A. I'm the Chief Fiscal Analyst for the Office of Finance and Budget, sitting in for Director Stephen Guerrero.
Good morning, Senators. Edward Byrne, Director of Administration.
Good morning, Senators. My name is Marie Lizama. I'm the Deputy Director of the Department of Revenue and Taxation, sitting in for Director Shimizu.
Good morning, Senators. I'm Vince Ariola, Director at the Department of Public Works.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We are now on Bill number 261-36LS, introduced by Speaker Teresa M. Terlahi, an act to repeal Article 4 and Article 5, both of Chapter 26, Title 11, Guam Code annotated, relative to eliminating the liquid fuel tax. As mentioned earlier, there is another Bill number 261-36LS, a substitute version. Madam Speaker, is there a motion you would like to make in that regard?
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Chair. So I do move to accept Bill number 261-36LS as substituted on the floor, and the copies have been provided. And the substitute version is also the same as the version in the committee report that's being routed, but it does just it restores language from the bill that makes so there will be no changes to exemptions from liquid fuels tax, no changes to penalties, and these are sections 26404, 26405, 26406, 26407, 26408. All of those were removed from the bill, so we're strictly speaking in this bill on the rates themselves, which is 26403. And it also removed from the intent of the bill any references to ARP or the infrastructure money, which we had stated in the intent originally. We just stated what we had received, what Guam had received in ARP and infrastructure funds from Congress. But that's removed from the bill, added to the intent of the bill, and this is the intent. We added two paragraphs. One is relative to what the CRER showed. That was a $61 million excess at the time that this bill was heard. In general fund revenues, $61 million excess. And we also added to the intent another paragraph that discusses that since FY 2019, the government of Guam has reported surpluses in its general fund revenues. In FY 2019, based on an audit by the public auditor, there was a surplus in general fund revenues by $35.6 million. In FY 2020, based on an audit by the public auditor, there was a surplus in general fund revenues by $46.3 million. In FY 2021, based on the CRER, there was a surplus in general fund revenues by $62 million. And the first 5 months of FY 22, there was a surplus in general fund revenues by $60.9 million. Of course, we're beyond that now, and I think that, anyways, but so the bill, that's what it says in the intent. And it also says, added one sentence that says in the intent that while still maintaining existing critical services like road repairs, mass transit, highway patrol, and village services, and funding such services with general fund revenues. So those were the changes in the substitute. So I would ask my colleagues to, that we move the substitute for our purposes of our discussion today.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So that is a motion to substitute Bill 261-36LS with the substituted version. All those, are there any objections to the motion? Seeing no objections, motion carries. We are now on the substitute version of Bill number 261-36LS, an act to amend Section 26403 of Article 4 and repeal Article 5, both of Chapter 26, Title 11, Guam Code annotated, relative to eliminating the liquid fuel tax on all fuel except liquid fuel used for commercial aviation purposes. Speaker Terlahi, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bill 261 was introduced in February to provide some relief to all consumers of gasoline by removing the local liquid fuels tax charged on every gallon of gasoline sold. While there are many different factors that we have very little control over impacting the price of fuel globally, removing our local tax is one part of the gas price that we can change, and it's something that we can change immediately. Currently, every gallon of gasoline is taxed an additional 15 cents through a local liquid fuels tax. There's also another 4 cents charged for the automotive surcharge and another 4 cents for the mass transit automotive surcharge. So altogether, that's a tax of an additional 23 cents per gallon for non-diesel fuel. So if you fill up your tank with about 15 gallons of gas every week, that's about 180 in liquid fuels tax that you are charged. We've met with many of the gas companies, and they've assured us, and testimony was submitted, that they would pass on the savings to the consumers if this bill was passed. The fiscal impact of this substitute version would be a reduction of approximately $8 million a year to the Guam Highway Fund. This translates to about $2.8 million, 2.8 for the remaining 4 months of fiscal year 2022. And currently, based on the April 2022 Consolidated Revenue and Expenditures Report, we have $87.6 million in excess revenues for FY 2022. This excess revenues can more than cover the $2.8 million needed for the remaining 4 months of the fiscal year and will ensure no appropriations are impacted. The impacts to future fiscal years is again $8 million, since that aviation portion was removed, $8 million a year. Nothing in the bill cuts any appropriation to any other agency. It simply cuts the tax. It repeals the tax for regular consumers of gas. This includes individuals and businesses. I'm proposing that we take $8 million of our excess $87.6 million, and that we give relief to the taxpayers, and that we can steal from the $87.6 million and the increase in appropriations or revenue that is expected next year, that we can still prioritize road repairs, services provided by the mayors, and public transit with the general fund, especially with the revenues that we are tracking. Again, I read out the revenues that we had received in prior fiscal years, excess revenues, meaning those were revenues that were recognized later, not appropriated by the legislature. $35.6 million in 2019, $46.3 million in 2020, $62 million in 2021, and now $87.6 in 2022. Now this bill makes a permanent repeal of the liquid fuels tax, and this will give gas consumers some peace of mind that our local tax is not contributing to their rising gas prices. Surely we can prioritize $8 million a year from our general fund and $2.5 million for the rest of the fiscal year, and give that back to our working families so that they can see relief at the pump. And this is for all families, all consumers. It does not require an application be submitted. It does not require that you fit into a certain income category. It's for all of those consumers of gas. Indefinite or short tax holidays tends to put markets in a holding pattern with a wait-and-see approach. And if a tax reduction can be counted on for longer periods, the markets can respond more favorable, since suppliers will have to expend the fuel supplies they have in order to avail of the new prices that don't include a tax. And also, many of them purchase at a 30 to 45-day average. So we are asking, again, that this be permanently direct these funds back to the people of Guam, and that we do not tax them anymore on this particular, and we are, and national media shows that there is no prediction for gas prices to significantly reduce in the next few years. It's been predicted otherwise, that gas prices, we may continue to see them rise. And so this will give some type of permanent relief to the hardworking, middle class, all of the people of Guam. Those working 1, 2, or 3 jobs, helps businesses who relies on gas. It will put back into consumers' pockets these savings. And it will still allow us, and does not impact at all, vital road repairs or other critical government services. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I ask for my colleagues' support on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Okay, we are now on, we'll proceed with round 1 on Bill 261-36 LS as substitute on the floor. Again, just as a reminder, each senator will be allotted 5 minutes for questions per round, not including responses. We will begin in the back row. Senator Tello Taidagui, you're recognized.
Sijus Masi, Mr. Chair, and again, my condolences to your family and yourself as well. Good morning, colleagues, and to those who are here at the panel, appreciate your time providing. I know this is an emergency session, so many times we don't have the opportunity to review these bills ahead of time. Mr. Byrne, have you had an opportunity to see the substitute version for this particular bill?
Good morning, Senator. I reviewed it this morning.
Read it this morning. And we're in the legislation. You do have a copy with you right now? Okay. Where in this legislation substituted bill do you see any appropriation made from the excess revenue of special fund, excess revenue period, going into the highway fund to cover any expenses? What location on the bill?
Not entirely sure that I have the latest version of the bill, but assuming this is the version that I got, I believe, from the Speaker's office yesterday, is the same version that is being discussed today. The only mention of the Guam Highway Fund is in Section 4, where it says nothing herein shall affect fiscal year 22 appropriations from the Guam Highway Fund in Public Law 3654.
Okay, so go ahead.
Senator Taidagui, I'm going to recommend we take a moment's recess to ensure that every member of the panel has the substitute version of the bill. So we'll take a short recess to make sure every member of the panel has the correct version of Bill 261.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we are back from recess. The members of the panel all have the correct version. They have the substituted version of Bill number 261-36 LS. Senator Taitigui, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Byrne, it's the same substituted version that you were looking at a few minutes ago. I mean, was there any changes? Is the correct one?
Senator, I didn't compare the bills word by word, but I do note that what I just read out from the version that I had does appear in this substituted version.
It does not appear. Okay, thank you. Mr. Byrne, I've noticed in the CRER report for, well, actually, the special funds for Guam Highway in FY21, there was a shortfall at the end of September in the amount of $3,179,837 shortfall. What is this, the special fund, Guam Highway fund tracking these days? Does it look like there'll be another shortfall? I know it's your best guesstimate, sir, if I can. I know we still have 5 more months, 6 more months to go, so. Or
yes, Senator,
4 more months.
if I recall correctly from the latest CRER, there is a shortfall expected, but it is a much smaller shortfall, and I believe it's less than $1 million. But that was, of course, assuming that the revenues do not change. Right?
That's assuming if the revenues don't change. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Byrne. Mr. Arreola, you're very familiar with all these bills?
I'm sorry, Senator.
You're very familiar with all these bills. I'm sure you attended the public
Yes,
hearing
ma'am.
for one of them.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, and I do realize that it would be hard for you to kind of comment on some of these bills that didn't have a public hearing. But I think the logistics there with regards to the amount, like doing the numbers. So I just want to go over some numbers with you, okay? And if this bill were to pass, the savings would be about 23 cents per gallon. Is that correct?
My understanding is it would be about 15 cents per gallon.
Okay, can you please double check that, sir? Because that's what I thought too. But if you take the liquid fuel tax rate currently at 14 cents per gallon for diesel, and then 15, so you're looking at 15 cents. I'll just go based on your numbers, sir, because you're the...
Right, 14 for diesel, 15 for regular gas.
Okay. So we're looking at that every gallon of gas that's purchased, there's a 15-cent tax, correct, sir?
Correct.
Okay.
As I understand, yes.
Okay. So the average car, we did a little calculation here. The average car uses about 14 gallons to fill up the tank. So if you take 14 gallons and you multiply that by 15 cents, there's a savings of $2.10, correct?
That's about right, yes, ma'am.
On a full tank of gas.
14 gallons.
Yeah, 14 gallons on a full tank, your car being a full tank. Now mostly, let's just take the average, the majority, uses a full tank of gas and lasts them about a week, let's say. So you multiply that $2.10 times 4 weeks, which is a month, right?
Okay.
So according to this bill and maybe some of the other bills, that's a savings of $8.04 in 1 month. Pretty soon that will look like, that won't even buy you a gallon of gas pretty soon if the price of gas keeps rolling up higher and higher. So would you say that this legislation is going to save the people of Guam $8.40 a month on gas? Is that your calculations to this? I mean, considering you have the buses to deal with and, you know, having to purchase gas for your agency, I mean, I'm sure you kind of did some kind of math here.
Senator, I don't know if it will save the people of Guam money. I think at the onset, if this tax relief bill does go into effect, I would expect from the moment it's enacted, the gas prices, diesel, fuel will go down by 14, 15 cents, right? But we can't control the other factors that have to deal with gas pricing. And so at any given time, you could lower the tax rate, but 2 weeks from now, who's to say that the gas prices don't go up because of other factors that we just have zero control of? Granted, the consumers out there won't be paying the 14 or 15 cents per gallon, but whatever the price of the gas or the fuel is, that's what they're going to have to pay, period.
Point of information, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
Just want
Madam
to point
Speaker.
out, the bill, in addition to amending the rate for diesel fuel, the tax rate for diesel fuel per gallon and the tax rate for other liquid fuel per gallon, the 14 or 15 cents, also repeals automotive surcharge, which is 4 cents per gallon, and the mass transit automotive surcharge, which is another 4 cents per gallon. And that's where those calculations came from that we stated earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Mr. Arreola, I've always considered you a common sense and, you know, you should do your due diligence in looking up information, but wouldn't you say that if the gas prices continue to go up, that more people are going to find ways to either carpool or put it this way, they probably won't be buying as much gas as they used to? Is that what you predict? I mean, let's say yourself, if it gets so expensive, you dust off your bicycle or, you know, call your neighbor if they're going in the same direction, or start carpooling and not purchasing as much. Is that pretty much the average person would do?
I think, Senator, it's really going to depend on a certain price point for the consumers out there. Some may be able to afford the gas price hikes, and some may not. And depending on what that price point is, they're going to turn around and say, okay, I'm going to start to carpool. I'm going to start to eat lunch at the office. I'm going to drive one way to work and one way home. I'll hitch a ride with my neighbor. Things of that nature. I think they're going to do everything they can to try to save gas. Once they reach that certain threshold or price point that really impacts their pocketbook. I have to imagine that's happening today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just for the record, you know, even though I gave those numbers earlier, about $8.44 savings a month, even if we went with 23 cents savings, that would save us $12.88 a month. That's it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tadegui. Senator Bloss, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just so that I can better understand this. The bill calls for the elimination of the 15% or 15-cent tax per gallon, liquid fuels tax, and then 4% surcharge. Actually, 2 surcharges in the total amount of about 8 cents. 8 cents per gallon. Mr. Byrne or anybody in the panel, where is this surcharge charged?
Hi, sir. I'm going to try to answer that as best I can.
Okay.
To my understanding, it's assessed at either the retail or the wholesale level. And I apologize, I am not familiar with the actual process.
Okay. Is it safe? Vince, do you have Anything, okay. Is it safe to say, assume that those surcharges are also charges that are tacked on to your fuel costs? When you're buying your gas now at $6.48 a gallon?
Yes, I would think so.
You believe, but you're not sure.
I am not sure.
So we don't know whether, we don't know, I mean, let's say this was to pass tomorrow. We don't quite understand if it's going to be a 15% or 15-cent reduction per gallon or a 24% or 24-cent reduction per gallon. Is that what we're saying?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that question.
Oh, that's okay. I understand. Well, can I ask for a favor in the midst of everything that's going on? If you can probably check with somebody in your shop, okay, as to where exactly are these surcharges tacked onto, so that we know.
Yes, sir.
Secondly, I find it difficult on page 6. Section 4, FY 2022 Guam Highway Fund Appropriations. It says, nothing herein shall affect fiscal year 2022 appropriations from the Guam Highway Fund in Public Law 3654. Mr. Byrne, can I get your take on that?
I'm not, Senator, terribly clear as to how the words would operate, but I assume the intention is that there would be no reduction in the appropriations made in Public Law 3654 to the various agencies to which those appropriations were made. So if you're looking at the fund, the highway fund, the expenditure section of that fund would look the same as if this revenue reduction had not passed.
Okay, I guess, Mr. Chair, I'd like to be able to direct the point of inquiry to the author of the legislation. Somehow, to better understand this section here, how do we intend to say that it shall not affect the 2022 appropriations? If it goes into effect tomorrow, it's going to affect the revenue, and the revenue is going to affect the appropriation. So what was the mechanism that was anticipated? What was that was going to be used to ensure that doesn't happen? So, Mr. Chair, I would like to direct that question to the author, if she so yields.
I would yield to that question, Mr. Chair.
Madam Speaker, you're recognized.
Yes, I'd be happy to yield to the question, and thank you for the question, because I think this is something that needs to be clarified. So the bill very clearly, nowhere in the bill does it de-appropriate from what any agency is supposed to get from the highway fund. So, but yes, the bill does reduce anticipated revenue to the highway fund, and this substitute bill would reduce that by $2.5 million for the rest of the fiscal year. That's all, $2.5 million. The special funds have been short in many fiscal years, and we have questioned BBMR about this, and for every shortfall, or for most of them, or DOA, or BBMR, they have told us that the administration covers the shortfall when necessary with general funds. We saw this so clearly during the pandemic because almost all of our special funds, our tourist attraction fund, many of our special funds, our customs and quarantine fund, other funds were extremely short. but they were covered by the excess general fund revenues that had been brought in. So as long as that appropriation remains on the books and this bill doesn't touch those appropriations, those remain on the books. So if those agencies need that money, the administration is more than capable and able to find that money, as what they have been doing is covering shortfalls. For example, 2021 budget, there were shortfalls to almost all of the special funds. And there was a $3 million shortfall to the Guam Highway Fund. But it's our understanding that none of the appropriations were repealed. They never come back and asked us to lower the appropriations to any of the agencies. They've tried their best to cover those appropriations to the appropriation levels. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Blas.
Mr. Byrd, do you concur with that?
Senator, thank you. Maybe I could be allowed to clarify the accounting of this so that it's understood. The CRER reports a shortfall in revenues. Revenues may indeed be reported as a shortfall or a surplus. But expenditures are the other side of the equation. So if revenues are reduced and expenditures are reduced, there would be no effect on the fund balance if that was the same number. The general fund is required to, I hate to say support, but I guess it supports a shortfall in the special fund balance. That may or may not be exactly the same number as the revenue shortfall, but that's what I wanted to clarify. It's not a revenue shortfall that the general fund is supporting, it's a deficit in the fund balance. And if you look at our financial statements, you can see for those funds that would have reported, those special funds, that would have reported a deficit in the fund balance, there's a transfer from the general fund to zero out the deficit on that special fund balance.
It's a transfer of the general funds that were appropriated or in excess?
It's a transfer from the balance of the general fund.
Okay.
So if the general fund, if you recall, Senator, up to last year, the general fund itself had a deficit. Last year, the deficit was right down to 1.5 million. And I've often said from this seat that we need to eliminate the deficit on the general fund so that we can fix all these other funds as the problems arise. And fortunately, in fiscal 21, we're in the position to be able to do that.
I'm just a little concerned of the presentation that the utilization of the excess funds to be able to cover the shortfalls. Okay, isn't it my understanding? Is it basic in the law that before you can even tap the excess fund, you have to?
Yes, it's a use of the fund balance. I mean, that's just accounting principles. That's just the way it works. That you cannot sustain a deficit fund balance on a special fund.
Okay, I'm still a little uncomfortable with that, but I'll get back to that later. Go ahead, Mr. Chair. I'll give you the rest of my time.
Thank you, Senator Blas. Senator San Agustin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like how it's discussed and brought up that in the previous years we've had surplus. But we also have to remind it that the surplus reduced the deficit. Correct, Mr. Byrne?
On the general fund, yes, sir.
Okay. Number two, that as we say, let's eliminate the liquid fuel tax, regardless of what the rate would be. when you reduce it, if the liquid fuel tax is coming in short, it'll just aggravate it more. That means there won't be any liquid fuel tax. And if it's estimated that throughout the year, and my colleagues know that throughout the year, for a whole year, it equates to about $10 million, not for the remainder of the year. I always have to look at what it is for the year, because you can always do your math simple and just divide it by 12, and it'll come up with what the amount will be per month. Sure, for the remainder of the year, it may be $2 million. How, Mr. Byrne, maybe you can tell us, how short are we on the liquid fuel tax today?
I don't actually have the number in my head, but if I recall from last month's CRER, it was something around about 600,000 or 700,000. 600,000
or 700,000. Okay, and I like to, as my colleague was identifying that how much it costs per gallon, we need to understand that when we talk about the liquid fuel tax, we're not talking about the vendor. We're not talking about the gas station that we all see. The liquid fuel tax is the impact on wholesalers. That's where the liquid fuel tax, if I'm correct. The liquid tax, surcharge, and everything is at the wholesaler's table. So if we reduce these, if we eliminate the tax, then hopefully the wholesaler will reduce the price to the vendor. And hopefully, there's a lot of hope, and hopefully the vendor will reduce the price to the customers. That's what it comes down. There's 3 steps to this. And that's why I introduced I authored a separate bill. But we need to picture this. As we come up and we start to think about the price of fuel, in 2018, the liquid fuel tax was not bringing in a lot of money. There was a shortfall, 18, 19, 20, 21, and so forth. But the price was only so much. I think it was like 3 some a gallon. And if at that time, the people of Guam were buying, hypothetically, let's say 20 gallons a week. You just do the simple math, 20 times 15 or 14, it comes up to a couple of dollars. As the time goes on, and we're today, probably most folks, when they walk in there, when they normally buy 20 gallons of gas a week, they probably said, I'm only going to buy 10. So what happens? The liquid fuel tax is less. The vendor profits continues, because why? There's a GRT at the vendors, and that's one bill that also was introduced that we'll be discussing later. So with that, gosh, I don't know how much further, but on this bill, it doesn't identify appropriation, doesn't identify how we're going to cover it, versus other bills do identify that. With that, I'll save my questions until we hear from other colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. Senator Perez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to the panel. I just have a question for OFB. So in the fiscal note, if you can confirm the averages per, I guess the averages per year, the averages based on 2018 to 2021 for each category, as well as the total, because in the fiscal note we did receive a comparison from DRT with the AS 400. I don't know if you have those numbers on you.
Senator, what we used for our fiscal note was also what was provided by DRT and BBMR. So each one, I don't have them.
So do you have an update as of today? Because I believe this was done previously.
No, I don't have that update.
Okay, so just looking at the numbers, so basically what Bill 261 would still keep the commercial aviation fuel tax. And according to this fiscal note, the average amount was 3 million or 3.5 million roughly. For this year, 2021, it's 2.5 million that we have collected thus far for the commercial aviation.
Oh, for commercial aviation? Let me see if I have that number. For commercial aviation, what was collected in FY 2021 was 2.5 million. That's what I have in my notes.
Right, so I mean, I just want to, the reason why I'm asking this is to determine the fiscal amount of that the general fund would have to cover. So what is the amount, you know, should we repeal the liquid fuels tax? Do you have an updated estimate of what it would cost the general fund?
No, I know at that time when we wrote the fiscal note, it was like 3 million, but as the speaker said, now it has reduced to 2 million because there's only like 3 months left in the fiscal year. So that sounds about right, estimate.
Yeah, so, but I'm looking at, for the full year though, if you look at the total amount, average is about 9.6 million. And if you subtract the average of 3 million, that amounts to about the 7 million.
Actually, so we utilized, utilizing the data that was given for 295, it's about the same data. Without the commercial aviation for the whole year would be about 8.8 million, we estimate.
So it's, yeah, but I'm looking at the average numbers here, so it's actually less, it's 7 million.
Because how we calculated it was based on the actual collections per year for the past 3 years. So the averages change. You know. So what we came up with, I recall the number is about 8.8 million for the annual impact.
Okay, and so you didn't include this 2021?
Yes, we included 2021.
So 2021, 2020, 2019, did you include 2018 as well?
I believe for the calculation is 2019 through 2021.
Okay, because in the fiscal note, it actually included 2018 as well. So the numbers are a little bit different. So I just wanted to get a clearer picture of what the impact would be fiscally, should we repeal the liquid fuels tax. So based on that, then it's a little bit higher, it's about 8 million, you're saying?
Yes, about
okay. All right, and so looking at, I guess the past years, I guess this question is for Director Byrne. Do you have an account of the surpluses, you know, what was used or what was, how it was utilized, all the surpluses in the past years? According to, in the intent of the bill, it talks about in 2019, 35.6 million, 2020, 46.3 million, 2021, 62 million. So do you have an account of how that surplus was utilized? And 2022 at 16.9 million. Can you provide a breakdown of how the surpluses were utilized?
Senator, you can look at our financial statements. Through fiscal 2020, any surplus generated on the general fund, and basically that would be fiscal 20 and fiscal 19, were used to reduce the accumulated deficit on the general fund. And as I mentioned earlier, we ended fiscal 20 with a deficit of just 1.5 million.
And then for 2021?
For 2021, we're currently finalizing the financial statements, and we'll have that number out, as I promised, by the end of the month.
Okay. And can you provide any preview of what it looks like?
Well, we're currently in discussions with our auditors about that, so I would prefer not to do that. But I think I can say that the position has not deteriorated.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the last part you said? I can't hear it.
The position has not deteriorated.
The position has not?
So we have not increased the deficit. We're still finalizing the number, but the deficit did not increase again.
Okay. All right. Unfortunately, Mr. Chair, we don't have an economist on this panel. Maybe perhaps if we recess and come back, I don't know about when we're recessing, but we can maybe request an economist to come on the panel. I have questions.
Duly noted.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that would be a motion to include an economist on the panel. We can continue with the questioning. We could probably come back. I can make the motion later. I think that's my questions for now. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Vice Speaker.
Situas Masi, Mr. Chair, and I think my question would be to the whole panel. Can any one of you specify any current and future projects that would be impacted by this bill?
At this point, Senator, I don't see any projects that would be impacted by this bill. Again, if I understand the intent correctly, is that the revenues would be reduced by, say, 2.5 million, and it's the expectation that whatever revenue shortfalls, if there is, in fact, a revenue shortfall, that would be made up by the governor transferring funds from the general fund. Is that the way I read it? That's the way I read it. So if in fact there's an infusion, there isn't a shortfall in our appropriation, services, I don't believe services would be affected. If.
Yeah, so maybe I should ask DOA if you can respond to my inquiry. I'm just...
Yes, thank you, Vice Speaker. Well, the wording that I read out before that appears in section 4, which only actually applies to fiscal 22, it says that nothing shall affect the appropriations that are currently in the budget for the highway fund. So if that intent is carried through, it would suggest that there are no effect on current projects because of this, because the bill effectively protects those projects.
But my train of thought here was that the reason why I asked that question was because I know that it's important that the taxes received on this provision is that it is to fund the roads that need to be fixed. Am I correct?
That's correct.
So taking away from the funding source in this area, are we now saying that the effect is not there? I mean, then this is not critical.
Yeah, Senator, from my vantage point from at DPW, we do the services, right? We have our budget. If the funds are there, we do the services, we provide the services, we pave the roads and things of that nature. If the funds are not there, I'm going to have to refer to BBMR, DOA, and perhaps this legislature to make sure that we do have the funds. That's basically my lane.
Vice Speaker, if I could, I believe OFB
Yes.
would like to add something.
Yeah, what I gather from this language is there's a technicality here because it says the FY22 appropriations from the Guam Highway Fund will not be affected, but in fact, we're saying the impact is $2.8 million less, so it is affected. So I don't know how you're able to not affect the operations or the appropriations to DPW without somehow adding either the general fund is going to, funds from the general fund is going to replace the impact. But right now, the way it's saying is that no Guam Highway Fund should remain the same, but in fact, we're just saying just 2.8 million impact.
Thank you. That's good information. Ed, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, I just wanted to make sure we understood the difference between an appropriation, which is, I think, what you are asking about, and how the fund operates. So the appropriations aren't affected. Obviously, in order to carry out the purpose of the fund, revenues of some type have to be put into the fund, And I think what we're struggling with is that part seems to be missing in the wording here. We've talked about the appropriations, but and I think it's different on the other bill, but in this bill, there's no wording that states that the revenues come from some other source.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne. Mr. Chair, I just based on the information received, I probably would have to ask you to come back to me at another time. I know I still have some time, but I'd like to yield some of that for the second round because my train of thought was completely different, and the reasoning for why we're here today because of the crisis, right? And why we are finally, I guess, at least for me, that I'm glad that we're finally discussing this, and because I know that it's clear that we all want the same goal. And I was under the impression we have this crisis right now and we must address that right now, but we don't want to jeopardize anything that would jeopardize the future of the funding that's needed for our residents to traverse. I mean, that's the main funding source, am I right?
That's correct.
That's correct, right? So I'm going to hold that thought, and you can come back to me later because, yeah, come back to me. Thank you.
Madam Vice Speaker, just for clarification, we will be sticking to the 5 minutes per round. However, you may ask a colleague of yours to yield some of his or her time to you for the second round.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that.
Senator Brown.
You know, I really don't have any questions for the panel, but I'm going to comment because of the fact that we have been brought into emergency session, obviously to address, a very significant issue that's been impacting our public. We've gone through 2 years of this pandemic, and certainly we're still seeing remnants of it because we still have our people that are being affected by it. And we had hoped that once we got through this hurdle, that we could get back to some sense of normalcy. Unfortunately, as a result, we're starting to find the economic impacts to our people, certainly worldwide. There are dynamics that are happening out there that are affecting what is happening here on our small island. And our people are really starting to feel that. We all are. I'm sure anyone here who's had to gas their car, I had to gas my car yesterday. I mean, it's almost another $10. Multiply that by every week that you have to gas your car. Going to buy your groceries, even just the routine groceries you need, be it your eggs, bread, just the regular things you would normally get. We're not talking about the T-bone steak on the side for Father's Day barbecue here. We're just talking the routine purchases. I think we're all feeling the impact. And certainly many people in our community are feeling it very directly, and certainly I understand and appreciate the Speaker's effort in calling us into emergency session to discuss this. And certainly we can ask all these questions. I think at the end of the day, we know that by removing the current cost of this tax, we're trying to provide some means of relief. And while some may argue it's not a substantial amount, this is something within our control to do today. And I understand, certainly, Director of Public Works, I appreciate the work that you do. It's hard. You don't have enough resources even to maintain existing roadways. And certainly I feel for that because I know that we must address and still will have a need to address how we're going to fund these critical repairs that are needed, particularly in our secondary roads that are not funded by the federal government, where our people continue to come to us and ask for support. But right now, and understanding even my feelings about the need to maintain our highways, we do have to do something today. And while we have many different versions of these bills before us, some may argue, well, this current bill doesn't have another mechanism to ensure funding is given to the intended purposes of what these taxes have provided for. I'm sure at the end of the day, we're going to come up with something that we have to pass, because I'm sure we're going to pass something today to address this emergency that's affecting our people. There's so many of our community right now, literally, you know, Mr. Chair and our colleagues here that are just trying to keep, you know, just to keep above the E line on their gas. Literally, for us, maybe not everybody in this room, maybe everyone in this room can afford it, certainly, but there are a lot of our people out there that can't. And they are making that decision to juggle between, you know, especially a lot of people that are just above the minimum wage level, you know, that are going to work to earn their income, and more credit to them, certainly out there working to get by, and they're just trying to stay above the E level to keep their gas tank from being empty because of these, just the gas increase, but everything else. And it's our hope that the fuel companies are going to pass this on. I'm sure they will. And yet we'll probably still see an increase in the gas prices. But this is something that we have the control to do now. I'm sure we're going to have to come back another day and address down the road, how are we going to continue to provide the funds to address our road maintenance, because that is critical as well, and it's something that's needed. But I think we need to move forward one way or the other, whichever version of this bill ultimately, this bill or any other bill that we have before us that gets the support. I think it's incumbent upon us at this juncture, with what our community is being affected by, we can at least do something today, something that's within our jurisdiction and within our authority, to minimize to whatever degree we can with this, removing this tax at this time, be it for now, be it 6 months, 8 months, a year, 2 years, whatever the case may be, because my colleagues, I fear our challenges for our people are going to get bigger. We make unfortunate decisions here that continue to expand the cost and the expense of government, that we burden our people. We certainly have an opportunity today to at least reduce this amount of tax at a time when the gas prices continue to rise almost on a daily and a weekly basis. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do that, and I look forward to supporting whichever version ultimately can come forth that we can get consensus on. With that, Mr. Chair, I don't have any further comment at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Moylan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the panel. Regarding 261, like the other bills that will be presented to the panel as well, as the last colleague just mentioned, we've seen the price of the gas pump just continuously increase. And since some of these bills have been introduced months ago, I recall it was $5 per gallon. Now we're closer to $6.50 or more, and $7 for diesel. So what are we doing, right? We're fortunate, and I thank the Speaker for calling the emergency session here, to have this panel in front of us so we can discuss solutions. There's probably no perfect bill, but with your expertise of this panel here, you can probably help us out to put together something or amend something here that we can show the public we have some control on these taxes to at least reduce something. Because we know when people are in line at the gas pumps, especially when we know the price is going to go up the next day, the line gets longer just to save a few more cents off the pump. You know, I can appreciate that we're going to be losing some revenue for the fund of the government as well, but you know, thinking of trying to pay off our deficit with more money that we have coming on in, the people also have a deficit, and their pocketbook probably it has a larger impact, you know, and governments are always in the red most of the time too, right? So eventually we get to that, but I think the priority and using the expertise of this panel here, we can come up with some good solutions. And I know our roads could be impacted too, but you know, our roads, 50 years they've been impacted, or even longer. If we're going to prioritize that, or we're going to prioritize helping our community today, right now, no matter what your income level is at, because really it's affected across the board. Whether you drive a nice car or whether you drive a car that has an expired decal, everybody needs the gasoline to get going. So I think I appreciate this bill, and looking forward to hearing the other bills as well, and working together with our colleagues and this panel to make good recommendations so that we can come up with a solution, one that works best, or maybe all of them, to present to the governor and move things forward. So with that, Mr. Chair, appreciate this, and thank you to the panel.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. Senator Dueñas.
Situs Masi, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the panel members who have come today to appear before us in this committee of the whole. You know, Mr. Chairman, I think that at least for this particular bill and another proposal that we'll be discussing, the fundamental issue really is there in terms of the need that I believe this legislature recognizes, and I want to recognize the previous two speakers with regard to that issue. I think the good part is that we're doing this in the committee of the whole at the legislature, which basically let's face it, we're talking about a budgetary issue. We're talking about the purse, and the purse is handled here. And so I appreciate that process is taking place. I think the only thing we need to discuss at this point, from my perspective, because we are currently, and I guess I'll address this directly to Mr. Byrne first, is that we will be back here in August, arguing and debating the 2023 budget, but we are here now, and both of these bills recognize that it is the balance of this fiscal year that is affected. So I guess for both bills, I'm going to ask the same question. I'll reiterate it next time. If this bill should pass for this fiscal year, will the Department of Administration recognize the revenues to cover whatever shortfalls, as has been the procedure that you have discussed consistently for any shortfalls in special funds?
Thank you for that question, Senator. It allows me to expand a little bit on what I was saying, and the difference between a fund balance and an appropriation. The intent, I'm sure, of this bill is to make sure that the existing appropriations that have been made under the current budget out of the Guam Highway Fund should continue to be made. Yes, in the event that expenditures equal that revenue, then I actually should say, were expenditures to exceed that revenue, yes, the general fund would have to come along and subsidize, if you like, support, I think was the word I used before, the deficit that would create on the fund. That generally doesn't happen contemporaneously. That happens when we start to draw up the financial statements. I think a cleaner way of dealing with this would be to identify some source of revenues. If it's the general fund, so be it. I mean, and to you, this might be no different from what I just said, but to me, it makes a big difference. Identify the general fund revenues, and if it's $2.5 million that needs to be recognized for the remainder of the financial year, that the bill stipulates that $2.5 million should come from the general fund, because that takes priority over all the other adjustments that have to be made, because the makeup that you were talking about of the special funds would affect every special fund, and were there not enough general fund revenues to make up every special fund, there would have to be a reduction, an allocation of that amount. So the cleaner way would be to actually stipulate that in this bill in order to avoid such an allocation having to happen when the financial statements are drawn up.
And Mr. Chairman, that's why I was driving at this, because I believe both proposals would require, and I know I'm not going to commingle, I know that's not the right thing to do here. However, I don't think it escapes anybody on the floor that the differences are whether it's perpetual or whether it's for a time certain. And so the reason why I'm saying, Mr. Chairman, that for me, when we debate this, of Of course, we're going to we will be debating what the requirements are to take care of our good friend Vince and the operation that he has to run at DPW on a year-by-year basis, subject to appropriation. Where that money is going to come from, it's going to come from when we sit down and haggle over that and whatever the chairman puts out as a document for us to debate. I think that clarity I want to provide for the people of Guam. You know, we are in this mode now in the legislature discussing what is the priorities of this body. What are the priorities going forward for the balance of this fiscal year? What are the priorities going forward for the subsequent fiscal year to come? But for me, on the record, I want to be clear. I'm going to vote for any bill that is going to provide for the relief. And Vince, I just wanted to assure you of that whatever we do, I know that we've made the commitment in this fiscal year for what projects you're going to carry out. And I, for one, won't vote on anything that won't make sure that you can carry that duty out. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to, in light of what's been identified in excess revenues, to give our people as much remedy as possible. So thank you, Mr. Byrne, for being able to give us some direction and clarity, because I believe whatever bill comes forward, or whether it's a hodgepodge of bills, that mechanism is going to be needed to put into place to make sure we have proper balances, and we also have the trigger mechanism to make sure that it's a reality when shortfalls arrive. I agree with my colleague, Senator Brown. I believe that there will be transparency throughout the marketplace to say that's been reduced, we're reducing it, and I think we can call for that accounting as well. However, I just really believe that it's going to be important to also recognize the fact that we don't jeopardize projects, and that the challenge next year, if the bill to make it perpetual is such, well, then we'll have to get out our pencils and figure it out in terms of what commitments we've made to the community in terms of taking care of the roadways and other projects. So for this round, Mr. Chairman, I don't have any further questions.
Thank you, Senator Dueñas. Senator Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Interestingly, this bill did receive a public hearing. Unfortunately, it didn't garner enough support to be reported out of committee, and perhaps there was reasonable considerations by those members voting to not report it out of committee. And I see now that the substituted bill, has some modifications in that it affects now just the rates, and it puts back the liquid fuel used for commercial aviation purposes. And perhaps some may argue that's a good thing, and some may argue that the first iteration was probably more advantageous in terms of if there was a corresponding effect on the prices of tickets to Guam that might affect the travel, the recovery of the tourism industry. I mean, just theoretically, and also people's access to medical care or travel for education or likewise. But I think, though, that what many of us are grappling with, and I can appreciate all the comments that have been made so far, but I think what Mr. Arreola, the one thing that you sort of hones in and that ties in with a lot of the concerns is, even in the preamble, the declaration in the preamble that the elimination of a fuel tax rate can result in lower gasoline prices. It doesn't guarantee, and as you pointed out, I think in your testimony earlier, there are so many conditions and factors that affect prices, and that one act doesn't necessarily guarantee an immediate reduction or a sustained reduction, and that's pretty much what you said. Is that correct? Okay.
Correct.
Yeah. So I don't have any questions for the panel. I think that many of the discussions have been brought up already, discussion points, and I appreciate that. But I do feel, though, that this bill, although substituted, doesn't cure, I believe, many of those reservations that other members in the committee had with regard to their non-committal to reporting this out of committee. So I just want to make that clear for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any questions, but I do have a concern that we don't have an economist here to really give us or the people an understanding of really the global impacts and everything that is causing the prices of gas to rise. I do share similar sentiments to my colleague who spoke earlier, is that really we want to see the best return for the people and assurances that if we remove the liquid fuel tax rates completely, that the vendors and the wholesalers will do the same. We will see that return at the pump. So perhaps, I guess I do have a question. Perhaps this is my question, is that if anyone on the panel has had discussions with the fuel wholesalers or the fuel vendors, has there been any discussion about perhaps an agreement that if we remove the liquid fuel tax completely, that they would also decrease the cost of the gas prices at the pump?
I haven't had any discussions.
Same with DRT.
DOA has not either.
I have sat in a presentation from the distributor, and what they've mentioned is that the taxes that are charged is one of the lowest in the nation, and again, what's being charged at the gas pump is really inclusive of the profits. So in that, the presenter at the presentation, I was mentioned that the liquid fuel taxes, he didn't believe it would provide significant impact, because we are even one of the lowest, again, taxed in the nation.
We have no such communications.
Okay, thank you for that.
Point of information, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, Madam.
Sure.
At the hearing on this bill, there was testimony submitted in writing from several of the gas companies on Guam, indicating that they would pass on that savings, if the tax is removed, that they would pass on that savings to the consumers. That was their testimony. It's in writing, and I can provide that to the Senator.
Yes,
Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, thank you for that information. That is very important. We need to see a source of commitment, and because we don't have a committee report available for us, for some reason or the other, I don't know why, but if we can ensure that these savings can get passed on to the consumers, then this is one of the avenues that we can absolutely explore to put in effect. I know we have an array of different types of bills to resolve our gas prices, but it is important that we understand the root of this cause, because right now we are being reactive in trying to move quickly to address the superficial layers to the cause of this inflation rather than the systemic cause. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I look forward to perhaps more dialogue. I hope that we can see the committee reports of the bills that we did have hearings on come out, and reaffirm the commitment of the wholesaler and/or vendors that the consumer will see the impact if we remove the liquid fuel tax and in the decrease of the cost of gas. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank my colleagues for their thoughtful questions on this bill. And I concur that there are many layers that affect gas prices. This is the layer that we control on Guam, that the government of Guam controls, and that's why this is the only layer that I'm, by this bill, trying to affect, and that we can affect if we act together. It's, as we said, the gas companies have submitted in writing that they would pass on the savings to the consumers if the tax is removed. I know we've waited for years. This is not new to us. Gas prices have been a source of concern maybe for every legislature prior to us. And you know, there have been gas crises in the past. We've always tried to control this price of gas and found it beyond our control. And, but I truly believe that instead of not taking them at their written word at this point, that we would do nothing if we didn't do that. And I want to point out, so that many of my colleagues have supported the tax relief for reduction of the GRT, the gross receipts tax, or the business privilege tax. We've reduced that. The legislature's reduced that from 5% to 3% for 90% of companies on Guam. And every time the fiscal note came out on those bills, it said that there would be a reduction in revenue. Of course there's a reduction of revenue if we reduce or repeal a tax. Of course. Because we're not taking that revenue out of people's pockets anymore. We're not going to receive it as a government. But in those bills, when we reduced the taxes from 5 to 3, we did it anyways. And we knew it would affect our revenue, but we did it anyways. And we knew that we would have to find ways, as my colleague pointed out earlier, we would have to find other ways to support what we were previously supporting from those revenues. And in this case, absolutely, we are going to find ways going forward, beginning in fiscal year 2023 and every other year. If we don't tax the people, then we find ways with the money we have to fund the roads. Of course, we need to do that. And I think it's imperative. I don't think there's anyone in here. I've argued strenuously for additions to budgets for road repairs, secondary road repairs, allowing them to use other funds that are available, and I think all of my colleagues support those efforts, and I don't see us shrinking from that. So the real impact that we have to face right now, immediately, if we pass this bill immediately, is the impact for the rest of the fiscal year, which is only the rest of June, July, August, and September. Less than 4 months. And so that's why we calculated the fiscal note impact for a full year was 10.5% based on the data given during our hearing on this bill by the Department of Revenue and Taxation and BBMR. 10.5. That's with the aviation fuel removed. Aviation fuel put back in reduces that 10.5 to about 7, and I'm estimating 8, okay? Let's just estimate conservatively $8 million impact for an entire fiscal year, and that's where we came up with the $2.8 million for the remaining 4 months. And that's, Mr. Byrne, you're saying that you would be more comfortable if we put in language that actually says that you're not going to cover this from, as you have in the past, for all the shortfalls for the special funds, and that you would like to see language that says we are appropriating that $2.8 million from the excess revenues in FY22?
Yes, Madam Speaker. I think you used the word prioritize. I was trying to use the word protect.
Okay, and I agree. It's prioritizing. I have no objection to adding that language if that's recommended, but I just want to clarify with you, Mr. Byrne, when the special funds were short, when the Guam Highway Fund is currently short, you said $600,000 to $700,000. Do you need an appropriation from the general fund to cover that shortfall?
Well, we don't know what the actual fund balance deficit is. As I tried to explain earlier, there might be a difference in expenditures, not because we don't want to spend it, but it might be a timing issue that actually would zero out that deficit. So And that we don't know until we draw up the financial statements.
All right. And in FY21, when there was a $3 million shortfall to the Guam Highway Fund, were there any appropriations made to cover that shortfall?
Well, as I mentioned to Senator Perez, we're finalizing the financial statements now. There was a transfer from the general fund. From memory, it wasn't as high as 3 million. I think it was maybe $1.5 million to zero out the fund, the resultant fund deficit.
All right. And so that's, but that's a tool. The transfer tool is also available to you?
Sorry, yes.
The Governor?
Yes, yes, it is.
Thank you. And then again, could DRT just remind us the total amount of taxes that this bill is affecting? The total amount of taxes.
For the,
Because there's
for the
some other
liquid fuels?
calculations that is only 14 or 15 cents, but if you could tell us
yeah. So
where the 23 cents that I'm calculating, if you can confirm that, I guess.
Yeah, so it would be, so you would have the, so it's all liquid fuel except that used for commercial aviation, right? And then you would have, let's see here, the 4 cents for automotive surcharge and the mass transit automotive surcharge. Is that what? I apologize, Madam Speaker.
Yes, thank you. And that totals 23 cents.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Mr. Byrne, was there any appropriation made to cover the reduction in the business privilege taxes when we reduced them from 5 to 3?
Madam Speaker, your time has expired. I'll allow this as the final question.
Thank you.
There was no need for an appropriation, Senator, because that is part of the excess revenues that you mentioned earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This concludes round 1. We will recess and return at 2 p.m.